Life Management Science Labs would like to acknowledge that we live and produce this podcast on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri people. We'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands of our listeners and our international colleagues. We'd like to pay our respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. Hi, and welcome to Self-Improvement Atlas, the Personal Science Insights podcast produced by LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. We are champions of life management science, providing structured insights informed by science and inspired by practice on key aspects of conscious living. Each week, we bring you scientific and practical insights on each element with the expert knowledge of professionals in the field. I'm Marie Stella, your host from Melbourne, Australia. Let's start the show. Welcome back to Self-Improvement Atlas, the Personal Science Insights podcast. In the realm of empathy and compassion, it's all too easy to lose ourselves in the vast sea of other people's emotions, leaving us depleted, drained, and weary. And as caregivers, therapists, or simply compassionate people, the weight of other suffering can sometimes feel very overwhelming, turning empathy into vicarious exhaustion. But what happens when those who provide care and solace find themselves in need of their own healing? Well, today we're guided by someone with plenty of experience with compassionate fatigue from their primary job, clinical psychologist Shannon Swales. In 2021, Shannon, like a lot of us, hit a wall with burnout. She set out to heal herself, keeping a journal of her progress, and that's now become a popular blog and podcast called When Burnout Becomes Reality. She previously joined us on Bouncing Back, the Personal Resilience Science Insights podcast with Joanna. So we're really happy to have her back on our suite of podcasts. Hi, Shannon. It's great to have you back on the show. I really admire your vulnerability with the podcast as well.
Oh, thank you, Marie. And it's absolutely fantastic to be back and particularly talking to this very personal topic. It's my absolute pleasure. Yeah.
Yeah, I am very, very stoked to learn more about your experience and how you got through it. But before we begin, I'm really curious to know if you could put into one sentence what your philosophy or ethos on burnout and compassionate fatigue is, what would you say it is?
Yeah, it's such a brilliant question. And just what comes to mind, and this may not really answer it, but it's just absolutely understated in terms of its impact emotionally, mentally, physically, but also socially, environmentally. Just it's almost like it collapses your world or potentially collapses your world. So I just feel like they're completely understated in terms of their impact. I don't know if that answers it. And it's just, to me, it's just complete utter exhaustion, mind, body, spirit, as I often talk to my clients about, and they often concur. That's, and that was my experience too.
Yeah.
That both of them, yeah.
Yeah. And how important is it, do you think, to be aware of compassionate fatigue or the potential effects of compassionate fatigue based off what you're currently doing and how much you're currently giving to other people?
It's extremely important. I mean, besides the scientific evidence of the people in exploring this compassion fatigue, just talking to people, working with people, going through it myself, it's extremely important that anyone working in a caregiving role or moving into that kind of role, whether it's paid, non-paid, any mother, father, parent, anyone who is, working with and in front of vulnerable others, constantly showing up in that sort of pain and suffering, it is vital to be aware. So if you know what to look out for, you can pick up on it. If you don't know, and I didn't know, we didn't have that training back then. And we might have, but not enough to really stick in my head. But I don't think so. I'm sure I'd probably remember, hey, watch out for these things: burnout, compassion fatigue, vicarious trauma, PTSD, depression, all these mental health conditions, mental health experiences people in these roles can experience, may experience, not necessarily, but could.
Right, and hopefully we'll learn more about that from you today. So thank you for sharing that. That was a great preface to our topic for today. But before we get further into detail, we like to get to know you better. This is Have You Met Shannon? And from what I can see, you're really excited about this too. My first question that I wanted to ask you was, what do you do in your spare time?
Well, if you asked me this like 5 years ago, I just crash and I go into bed and I do nothing because I have nothing, meaning have no energy. But now, well, actually, that's a lie. I still had time to travel. So I would travel a couple of times a year. Like I made that time. That was probably something that kept compassion fatigue and burnout at bay for me for quite a while is I did regularly travel. I love to travel. And although that's been on hold for a few years for various reasons, it's still a passion of mine and I'll get back there. But generally, there's my spare time. It's really simple. I just love to, sometimes it's connecting just with myself, my immediate family, my husband and my two puppies, or some mates, family. But it's just going out for a coffee or, just really chilled things. I'm a mostly introvert at heart, so I get my energy from being sort of, low key, nothing too grand. So that's just simple life really, with some speckle of travel and going overseas and all that kind of stuff.
I definitely relate to some of the previous experiences you had with burnout as well, with having to feeling like you need to travel just to keep the burnout at bay. I had that experience before I moved to Melbourne. I lived in a very fast-paced city and I was burnt out all the time. And while traveling is so fun and that revitalizes us, having to bank on the revitalization of travel is not the best way to handle the burnout. It's really a coping mechanism at best and doesn't really truly help with it. But I'm really curious to know what some of your favorite activities to do were when you were on this journey to healing.
Oh, the favorite activities while I was healing. Initially, I didn't have any energy really to do much. So I was already in a routine of exercising. So I kept that up. That was something I was like, if there's nothing else I do all day, I'm going to the gym in the morning because it's the gym that I go to and I still go to is a community one. So, you train with the same people every day. So friendships are being formed and our crew would go for coffee afterwards. So that was my favorite, still is one of my favorite activities to do in the morning. So there was that and nature walks. I live luckily next to a really lovely park, tall gum trees. It's a dog park as well, open one, no fencing, love it. And so just would go there with my dogs or dog at the time. I've got dogs now. So those were my favorite things to do, really, and lots of silent time because I just couldn't do people beyond my morning crew because there was no serious chats there. It was a lot of just camaraderie. How's your day going? What are you doing? That session was hard, like just surface stuff, which was all I could really do. Yeah.
Yeah, that's completely fair. And sometimes even the morning surface crew stuff and grabbing coffee with them does make all the difference in your mood. And while it's merely surface stuff, it can help to set the tone for the rest of the day and keep you getting out of bed and motivated to look forward to this thing that might be not the deepest relationships you have ever, but keep you encouraged to go out there and grab a coffee and take a daily walk. So it's really great to hear that you had that while you're healing. But during this period of time, was there anyone that you looked up to, either professionally or personally?
Yeah, I mean, just in general, I tend to look up to people who have been through adversity, whether that's someone who's famous or not, it doesn't matter. Like I just recently read, or I'm an audiobook person. I listened to Matthew Perry's journey and what he's been through. So it doesn't matter, famous or not. I love reading, hearing. And so really just looking up to people who I was listening to or maybe following on social media, just other people going through what I was going through or something similar, and learning through them. And I got to speak to a couple of psychs who shared their story of burnout and compassion fatigue and some of the vicarious trauma. That was really helpful. And I suppose I looked to rather than looked up, as a guide, to help and through that. Yeah. So look to.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. I did look into Matthew Perry's story a little bit. I didn't read the whole book, but I found a lot of the vulnerability that he displayed after his acting career just really insightful, and it helped to kind of draw awareness to all of the trials and tribulations of being under the spotlight and being overworked from a young age. So it is. I can relate to what you're saying about not necessarily looking up to them, but kind of drawing some sort of inspiration from them with regards to displaying that vulnerability and relating to them as well, which is great. And another thing I wanted to ask, but I kind of slipped my mind to ask this. You did mention that traveling was one of the things that you enjoyed doing, peppering it throughout your life, your otherwise simple life. What are some travel spots that you have yet to go to that you've really wanted to tackle?
Oh, so many, so many. Iceland. I want to go there. I recently got to see some pictures of in China, like their national parks or whatever they call it. Just their nature just seems out of this world. Love to go there. I don't know exactly where, but just I'm not a city person, so just away from the city. I've grown to understand through all my travel that what I really enjoy is the nature aspects of where I go. So anywhere that I haven't seen yet, Africa is another one. Always wanted to go to Africa, still haven't. And so I don't know which parts, but again, just to be exposed to the nature, and the nature that we don't have here that they have. And so yeah, nature.
Yeah, for sure. It's really, really amazing, incredible how different parts of the world have such vastly different landscapes in their nature. I know that China has a few nature spots that are just so beautiful and so surreal looking. It doesn't look like it is real life, and you just don't get this kind of landscape anywhere else. I know there is this group of like little like lakes, almost like like water pools. They're like really large water pools kind of leveled on top of each other, and they're all like clear water, and it's all natural, and it looks so amazing. I've got to send you a link to it or something like that after the podcast. But yeah, stuff like that is just always so awe-inspiring, and it really kind of puts a lot of things into perspective.
Being in nature, definitely. My last trip, international trip before COVID hit, was in Scandinavia and Norway. And we got to spend a lot of times in the fjords and the mountains. And it's just, and we were on this cruise, and not a commercial cruise. It was, anyway, long story short, we just got to really be immersed in nature, and it was just amazing, amazing. And that's when I really learned, this is why I travel. I just want to see things that are different to what I see, which, I mean, I live in Brisbane, so I just see what I see here.
Brisbane's
Nature. Yeah.
Brisbane's beautiful too,
Yeah.
with Surfers Paradise, all the jellyfish.
Sunshine Coast.
Sunshine Coast.
Yeah. Surfers
yeah.
Paradise.
What do you like about
people?
Yeah. Well,
yeah.
what do
Sunshine
you
Coast is quieter. It's quieter. It's still touristy, but there's just not the skyscrapers. It's not. I just find surfers tacky. It's like the Las Vegas of beaches. And I mean, although I did actually like Las Vegas, I did get to see that for different other reasons. But Yeah, I just find surface itself is become tacky. But it's been a while, whereas it just feels more natural, nature orientated. They've kept it, whilst it's still, quite developed, there's just not as much development in the Sunshine Coast beaches compared to the Gold Coast beaches. So
That actually does sound beautiful. I haven't heard that much about Sunshine Coast, even though my partner's from Sunshine Coast. He's a city boy, so he moved to Melbourne and just it swears by Melbourne life, which I've been wanting to learn more about Sunshine Coast. So, what are some of your favorite spots in Sunshine Coast? Why do you like it?
One of my favorites is actually in the hinterlands rather than the beaches. My in-laws live in the hinterland. So there's a place about 10 minutes away. You go up the hill. It's called Mullaney. There's Mullaney and there's Montville. And it's just out in the mountains. They're touristy. But, so they've got this little strip of cafes and little shops. But if you go there during a weekday, it's just quite beautiful and chilled. And I don't know. Yeah, the surrounds are beautiful. Just lots of green, lots of farmland, just vastness. Yeah. So it's just beautiful. And beach-wise, it'd have to be just south from Noosa. I think it's called Rainbow Beach, but you get away from the tourist mecca of Noosa, and I mean it's beautiful. But yeah, you just go south from there. Whatever those beaches are called, really beautiful. It's been a while since I've been there. I think it's Rainbow Beach, something like that.
That actually sounds lovely. I just imagine like farmers markets every third Sunday of the month or something like that, and really tranquil. And you're in a small town, and sometimes it gets rainy occasionally, and it's a little bit humid. But I am getting too far into detail with this.
We can
But
talk about that.
yeah, you've already painted such a good picture of Sunshine Coast that I just have to keep going in my mind. But before we get way off track, I feel like we got to know a bit about you now, and I'm comfortable moving on to the interview section. How are you feeling?
Sounds great, Marie.
All
Yeah.
right, amazing. So the first question I have for you is, how would you define personal development?
Oh, yeah. I really feel like with personal development, it's any action that's mental or physical, behavioral, that is aligned with growth. And I suppose like a mental example, like one of the growth things that I've been through is being able to let go of my perfectionistic belief system and ways of being, which is also behavioral as well, but it's also a mental process because there's lots of thoughts and feelings that come with it. So that's why I want to stress it's the mental changes too. Some people call that mind shifts. That's what I think it is.
Yeah, it is really interesting. I do struggle with perfectionism myself a little bit, and I have been trying to get out of that. And it's really interesting to go through that process of growth, because there's so many instances where you have to ask yourself why you're doing this rather than mindlessly perpetuating all these behaviors that you don't really want to continue doing. You have to ask, well, where does it stem from, and not to put the blame on that, but more of like, this is why I do it, and then move on from there. And you find out so much about yourself from that. And in that journey itself, you are learning so much about yourself, and that's so much growth in it of itself. But with regards to compassion fatigue, how would you describe it?
Yeah, well, with compassion fatigue, utilizing my own personal experience, but also working with clients and looking also into the research. So it's sort of a mismatch of everything that I'm learning. But I see it as it's the result of ongoing exposure to holding a compassionate space for clients, for people, whoever they might be, who are in pain and suffering. So you've got that continual exposure of that trauma that client's going through, or clients, because you have more than one, and you're holding and you're trained to hold a compassionate space, and that's what helps them, or part of it, and that you can only hold so much. So eventually you fatigue because you're human. You're not a ball of energy, that can be just expended all the time. So yeah, that's how I define it. Yeah.
Yeah. And in terms of the effects, positive or negative, psychologically, physically, what have you, how does it differ from experiencing typical stress?
Yeah, well, stress, when you look at stress, I recently actually did a post on this, but looking at burnout versus stress. Stress is, when we are experiencing a load, a load that we don't have the resources to meet. And stress is a term that should only be used for like short-term kind of spurts of, okay, this load is a lot. Like it might be, okay, 1 week you've just, your load for that week is huge. And maybe you've got I know you're looking after someone's kid on top of your kids. So that load is just, but then you go back to your normal load and it's doable. You have the resources to meet that. That's stress. Compassion fatigue is different and burnout is different because it's not something you can recover from quickly. It's a load you've been carrying for a long time. Like burnout is chronic stress. So it's a load we've been carrying for a long time. So our resources versus our load is mismatched. And so it's for a long time. And compassion fatigue, I mean, the difference there is the load we're talking about is a trauma load. You're carrying the trauma load of what you've been exposed to, that vicarious, you haven't experienced it, but you're listening to it, you're absorbing it, you're vicariously experiencing it. So it's a trauma load you're carrying. And again, it's chronic. When it results in full-blown compassion fatigue that you're not able to, like in my case, function, to turn up and do the work with your client. So yeah. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, it definitely does. And what are some clear signs that you are experiencing chronic stress, i.e., compassion fatigue or burnout?
Yeah. Well, I mean, the compassion fatigue and burnout, often the symptoms or the signs, I hate medicalizing it, the signs are often very similar. The differences are what I said before, that trauma load versus like often with burnout, it's more, that's the load can be lots of different loads. It can be, the workload that you've been given. It can be the load you're carrying in your mind about, lots of different things. But with compassion fatigue, it's that trauma load, that exposure to being compassionate constantly in the presence of this pain. So the signs, I suppose, just leaning more on the compassion fatigue, but mindful that it's similar to burnout. But the interesting thing about compassion fatigue sign that I wasn't aware of a lot of them, but was the most hardest to deal with for me and some clients I work with, is the sadness and grief that hasn't been expressed by being continually exposed to that. Like that's a huge one. There's also the sign of just dread of that wasn't there before, with turning up and being present in with that position. Feeling dread, but even feeling detached, where there was sort of empathy and sympathy and that sensitivity to other people's pain there before, it's not there. I call it the don't care attitude. Even though you do care, there's no energy there to care. So there's that too. There's so many. There's a huge amount of signs, but they're probably the big ones. And often compassion fatigue and burnout co-occur, especially with caregivers who are working or present with constant pain and suffering. They'll probably find that they experience both.
Yeah. And now that you've kind of elaborated a little bit more on the signs, that's detachment from empathy that you were mentioning does sound a lot like burnout, but applied to this one specific aspect of being a caregiver or compassionate jobs, which is really, really interesting. And how did you manage to strike a balance between, how did you manage to recover from compassion fatigue?
Well, for me, because it got that bad that I was unable to work, and that wasn't a choice. It was I couldn't anymore. So the way I recovered is I took rest, although I really didn't want to. that was really hard to adjust to. But I took 3 to 4 months off working, and that was really helpful and important. I was in a very privileged position to be able to do that. I know it's not in everyone's position to. I was lucky in that way. But I didn't do I call it my toxic independent thing and go, no, I'm going to work anyway, because that's what I would have done. But with the encouragement and support by some really good people, I didn't. And then I didn't go back to clinical work. I didn't go back to that exposure of vulnerable others. I went and worked in a different area. I went into teaching part-time counselors. So I stayed away from that exposure because I was still healing. And I did that for 18 months before coming back to doing the work I did. And the biggest thing is I went to therapy too. I employed a clinical psych who specializes in this area, and she helped me address the underlying issues that contributed to my prognosis, my burnout and compassion fatigue. And so and vicarious trauma, we went in and did the work on that. So that was the biggest thing. Those are probably the biggest things: time away, stepping back, gradual return, and doing the work. And that was hard. Therapy takes work. So I'm glad I had the space to be able to do it without the pressures of doing the work that I was doing.
Yeah, for sure. And it sounds like you've come a long way as well, especially with taking time off. For someone who is so independent and so perfectionist, it must have been really hard to tell yourself to take that time off. And in that, you wouldn't want to revert your progress at all. So what practices do you employ now and instill in your life in order to make sure that you do not go back to compassion fatigue?
Yeah. The biggest one was journaling, and journaling to connect back to self, because I was very disconnected from me. Like, I was doing the self-care things, and I do the inverted commas because, I was going on holidays, I was, trying to keep to my boundaries at work in terms of not taking it home. Like, I was doing what would appear, I was exercising, I was eating well, nutrition, lifestyle, all the things looked like on the surface I should be doing well. But I was so disconnected from me. And so the work was about connecting back to self, how I was truly feeling, what was showing up in my body, what is my mind doing, how am I acting? And journaling was just the mechanism in which to do it for me, to really, truly come back to me. And that's something I continue to do to stay well. No such thing as perfection anymore. And ever. I do that, as well as I do it, which is not always great. But that was a big, and still is a big, I know the coping mechanism, but I like to call it wellness practice or something like that, however you'd like to term it. Language is important, so you've got to find the term that works for you. But these are the things that not only help me recover, but help me stay well. And if I'm on track with your question as well, the other big aspect is I changed my environment. How I was working and how I was living was not conducive to wellness at all in the industry I've chosen to work in and still choose to work in. It's still aligned to my values and is what drives me. But I was not working in a way that was conducive to my wellness. And I say mine because when I work with clients, when I talk to people about this, everyone's, we're all unique. We all have a different brain type, body type, what we need would be different. So for me, it means I used to see clients, 6 clients a day, 4 days a week, report writing on one other day. That's totally doesn't work for my mind and body and spirit. Now I see 2 clients a day, 5 days a week. And I do a variety of other work like this stuff. I have a podcast, I thrive on variety. So I set up my environment to support my wellness. So I haven't just changed the internal stuff, but the external to recover. And that took a while to be okay with, because I had a lot of, as a lot of people do, belief systems around what you should do. You know, what I got brought up, you know, you talked about earlier, going back into history with that, developing personally, you know, the things that I got taught didn't work for me, you know, and it doesn't work for now in the society we live in now. So changing all of that, there was a lot of unlearning and unraveling to then create and craft. I like this word craft. They, in Burnout Compassion Fatigue, they talk about crafting. You know, we craft our lives in a way that will work for our well-being as best as we can. You know, I mean, again, I am in a privileged position. I also, well, it was a choice. I don't have kids. Most 40-year-old women that I know have kids, you know, and that's another whole kettle of fish. But yeah, there's certain things that I can do, and I don't have a mortgage. So, you know, yay. But I don't have those stresses. Again, choices. I made certain choices. I could have a mortgage, but I chose not to. I chose to travel. But, you know, anyway, I hope that answers your question. But those are the big things, I suppose, in terms of what's working or what's helped, and what I then work on with clients as well to help them.
It certainly does. But on a broader scale, how important is it to establish boundaries both in personal lives and professional lives in order to prevent or alleviate compassion fatigue? And how does this look like? What does it mean to set boundaries?
Yeah, boundaries is a topic I've actually over the last month really focused in on a little bit, and sort of a personal, professional journey there, but also to help support my community as well that I work with. It's extremely important. And it is one I'm still on the journey of, of working on, to be honest. Uh, boundaries, to me, like boundaries are really about knowing what it is that we need. And we only know what we need through connecting with ourselves and knowing what's going on in our bodies and minds as we walk this life. But it's knowing all that and then being able to protect that as we connect with other people, other roles or responsibilities, tasks or whatever. But knowing, I often imagine a circle around myself, and in that circle is my needs and my connection with self. And then outside of that circle is the environments I'm exposed to, the industry, the work I do, my people, you know, that I interact with. And it's different with obviously all those different environments. But boundaries are extremely important because I see it as a protector of your well-being. But also, like, it is, and it's not like a full-on brick wall or something that can't be. It's permeable, you know, because people and environments can actually be really conducive to your needs and your feelings and your thoughts and, you know, your sensations. But it's that awareness of self and self needs as well as what this environment and these people are doing. So again, I'm not sure if that's answering your question, but yeah, it requires so many skills. Like when I'm working with boundaries with clients, some of the blocks and barriers and fears with setting boundaries are things like I work with a lot of women, including myself, who are people pleasers, are self-sacrificers, and they're in this behavioral pattern, and that's not conducive to setting boundaries. So working on unraveling and unlearning that and learning to still be able to be the person you want to be with others, but also have that relationship with yourself that is you're caring for you as well as caring for others. So there's a lot of work around addressing the fears, blocks, and barriers to help people be able to execute and keep their boundaries or even know what they are. Like, what are my boundaries? Yeah, there's a lot of work.
That makes a lot of sense. And I really like the way you put that the boundaries are kind of your protector of your well being, that is permeable. And permeable is so important here because your needs can fluctuate and they can change. And it is also important to take into account the environment that you're in. So I really like that you put it that way. But in terms of organizations and workplaces, What is your opinion of the culture that we currently have when it comes to compassion fatigue among employees or volunteers? Do you think that there's anything that needs to be changed or addressed?
It's the culture is different by industry to industry. By even we can go down to the workplace itself within those industries, and even then the team. The team. So it really depends on that environment. Because it's different. With every industry and every team and workplace. I think on a more global scale, just like sitting back and when I say global, more Australian culture at least, is that there is this hustle culture and this, that it's almost a sign of success to be busy and to be doing, or even for people in the caregiving role that almost like that is their identity as well. I might be veering off topic a little bit, but that there's definitely, certainly cultural issues and systemic issues that create the recipe for disaster in terms of employees, workers fatiguing, compassion fatigue or burnout, and other mental health issues, of course. And the great news is there's a lot of things that can be done there. It's going to require a lot of change. Just like the individual I've been sharing, the monumentous change that internally can go on and changing. And I'm learning a lot of the things that are contributing to, from an individual level. But the same thing with organizations. It might seem like a huge job even facing it, but it's possible and important because of the well-being of the workers. And if workers aren't well, it's going to cost you as a business anyway. And they've proven that economically, that it costs you not to look after, not to look at the systemic changes that can happen to look after your employees. It's going to cost you eventually if you don't do it. You'll, high staff turnover, things like that.
Yeah. And what do you think are some of the major changes that would make a positive impact in addressing compassion fatigue?
Yeah, well, I think coming down to that level on the caregiving professions, I actually listened to this reel or TikTok video where there's this lady who interviews people just out in the public, what do you do for a living and stuff? And there was these two young women who worked in a pediatric palliative care unit. Now that's, and my brain's just thinking, even now my body's just like gets the shivers, the exposure to the pain and suffering that they as clinicians, as the workers there would be under, and then having to hold space for the families, for the children and each other. And these two women were talking and beaming about their job. And the few things that came out of that chat, that these are things that companies, teams, workplaces can do, that they had there and what helped them stave off compassion fatigue, be able to continue to show up and enjoy their job, is they got regular debriefing. They got regular supervision. And I mean, on a daily basis if needed. Their rostering, I think they talked about flexibility there if they needed to go home. But there was there was awareness too. I think they also, even if it wasn't in this example, I also know that it should be on the onboarding process when people are moving into these kind of positions or even starting training, like in psych, your undergrad. We need to be giving this information about these are the potential risks, not to scare them, but to arm them with the knowledge to check in with themselves and to put their well-being first. And so, but these measures of debriefing, supervision, I think they also had like a club or something where there was a social thing that would they catch up and do. So there was some fun and play that was organised as well. I don't think that was on the job, but they would catch up. But yeah, things like that will help people to be able to do the work and rostering accordingly, not like, 10 days straight, 12-hour shifts or something. With that kind of work, you need to have and that's been proven. You need to have a humane scheduling with that kind of thing. And I think they did talk about some rotation of teams.
Yeah, for sure. And the debriefing, I know from personal experience, can be so helpful in kind of circumventing the compassion fatigue or the burnout, because you in stressful situations, we are human beings. We tend to need the space to kind of sound off our thoughts and process them. In order to process what we've just been through, we need a sounding board. We need someone to talk about these things with, and for them to talk about these things back to us with. And that is so important in being able to really stay connected to your job and yourself. And that's just so underrated in so many so many workplaces. But aside from the workplace, what are some therapeutic approaches or interventions that would be particularly effective in helping people through burnout or compassion fatigue?
On a, like, if we're talking, with the individual itself, the interesting thing about the research, they haven't found like a conclusive, ABC, this is what we need to do. What they have conclusively found that we need to address it from a systemic and individual level. If we put the individual back into a system that's breeding the compassion fatigue, is like, that's not going to work. But on an individual level, certainly things like mindfulness has been found to be a helpful adjunct to therapy, and something I utilize with my clients and myself. And mindfulness is useful because it helps us be able to bring a very conscious awareness of our experience moment to moment, and in a non-judgmental way, which often, myself and others included, we tend to be in judgment mode of what we're experiencing. So mindfulness is a really important aspect to be able to really connect with ourselves and be able to make helpful choices. But there's other therapies that can be really useful as well, like cognitive behavioral based therapies. I use ACT, acceptance commitment therapy, that falls under that umbrella. But essentially these approaches help us be able to look at our thoughts and our belief systems, like the perfectionism one or that self-sacrificing, and be able to, with tools, be able to work on unlearning that, and so we can affect the behavior in a positive way. When I say positive, I mean in a growth-orientated way, because growing doesn't necessarily mean without growing pains. They will be uncomfortable to start with. And that's what I like about ACT. ACT teaches values and being values-led rather than goal-led. Like, goals are great, but leading with values in our behaviors. So drawing on those therapies, but lots of practical things. I mean, that's practical, but like things like looking at lifestyle, looking at skills like the boundary setting, communication skills. Sometimes our communication skills might not be great, and that could be impeding. Like we might be more passive aggressive rather than assertive. So there's lots of skill building and crafting that is recommended as well. And if trauma is involved there too, if we're kind of sliding into the kind of vicarious trauma, which a lot of caregivers can be with that exposure to the trauma. So it's compassion fatigue plus some secondary trauma there. Things like EMDR, which is, I always forget that's the acronym, but trauma-informed therapists at least, but some techniques, like I had EMDR done to me for my vicarious trauma, and it's like the A-level intervention for trauma conditions now, but still your ACT CBT base can be useful as well. Mindfulness is definitely important. Oh, and the other one, compassion-focused therapy, a lot of people haven't heard about, but this one is about, really, I use it to help people develop the relationship with themselves that is based on compassion, to be able to, because people who do these jobs tend to be really great in being compassionate outwards. They've got the empathy, the sensitivity, the non-judgment towards others down pat. They can care for their well-being. But when it comes to themselves, they don't have that. So CFT really helps with the skills and knowledge to walk that path and get to that place. And that one is, I think, paramount to preventing but recovering from compassion fatigue, where there's nil or very little compassion for self.
Yeah, that's all really insightful. And I had no idea that so many of these therapies would be so effective in addressing burnout and compassion fatigue either. And it's also something that I feel like hasn't been discussed a lot, at least not in my circles. The importance of choosing the therapist with the right skill sets or the right knowledge on a therapy that would be better suited for you and your experiences and your needs. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so if I heard you rightly, Marie, like that importance of picking the right therapist who's got the techniques.
Mhm.
Yeah, like abs, like you're spot on the money. It's so important. And it's also really hard because when a person makes that decision to go to a therapist, it's often with a lot of fear, anxiety, concern, worry, stress, even because the money. And so to hear that you might need a bit of trial and error, like, that you go see one therapist and they end up not being the right fit. Because, I mean, whilst you can find out about the therapist, they usually have websites and you jump on. I always say do that, do your research. You maybe even talk to, if there is a trusted friend or GP, seeing if they have someone they recommend. But jumping on their websites, or if they have a social media account, like a professional one, just getting a sense of them. Because sometimes I've had clients choose me not because of the approaches that I use, but because of how they felt when they connected with me via my social media pages, or I always do a one-off phone call or video chat, just 15-minute consultation for free, just so they can get a sense of me. And often I hear that I just want to get a sense of the person, because if they feel safe enough, that's going to be more important than the stuff that the therapist does is important, but the relationship is more important, because if you don't feel comfortable enough with them, you're not going to open up, which is then needed for the therapist to provide the right therapy. So hopefully that might answer it. So it is very important it'll be a bit of trial and error.
Yeah, that's really so interesting to me. And I feel like you've shared a lot with us about what compassion fatigue is, how to manage it, what preventative methods to use. So I really appreciate you spending time with us on this today. I feel like it's such an important topic as well. And I feel like you really speak from the heart when you talk about this topic. So that's always welcome and so much appreciated. Now we're moving on to the open mic section. And this is your chance to talk about anything that you're passionate about. And it doesn't have to be related to the topic. So you're free to talk about travel, or you're free to still talk about compassion fatigue if you like. So the floor is yours, Shannon.
Open mic. Wow. I always find this a little bit harder, but let me think. I think for me, what I want to share, this is coming actually from my heart space at the moment. If anyone's listening who's embarking on a career or a job or position or whatever that requires being present with other people's vulnerability, their pain and suffering, and that you're noticing or hearing from me that, yeah, actually that compassion in for self is not quite there, I really encourage to go out there and connect with compassion focused therapy, or there's some really great work out there, like Paul Gilbert. I highly recommend. He's the creator of CFT. But even Kristen Neff, she's a self-compassionate therapist and researcher over in America. She's got a lot of beautiful things out there. It's just, or connect with a therapist who's CFT trained, who can help you with that, because that is going to be a buffer. That's a term one of my clients used the other day, that is going to be your buffer to help prevent. I mean, it's not the only thing, but I just really stress to do that work. And it is hard work if we've never, it often comes with a lot of fears, blocks and barriers, but a trained therapist can help you with that. It's so important. And I bloody wish I had that. I wish I had that before I became a therapist. I really do had that knowledge. So that's just something I just want to put out there. And anyone who's already doing the work and finding, oh crap, I'm really critical about myself. I don't have a compassionate relationship with myself. It's not too late. I was there too. Go start doing the work. My first thing I did when I discovered self-compassion was read Kristen Neff's book on self-compassion, and every bit counts. And that was my first start. And from there, it rolled on from there. And when I was recovering from burnout and stuff, I did Stan Steindl, clinical psych in Brisbane. He put out a book called Gifts of Compassion or something like that. And it's a workbook as well as a book, and it's brilliant. It's really consumable. And he comes from the heart. Just do the work, please, for yourself and for your clients. The thing is, when we're compassionate towards ourselves, we are a better compassionate person outwards. We sometimes think we'll lose that if we turn in. No, you gain, because you are a resource. And if you're not resourced, your resource for other people, the stuff you're putting out is going to be less than. But when you're putting in, the shit that you can put out then is going to be brilliant. It might be less time that you devote to that because you're devoting time for yourself, but the quality, and I always say quality over quantity, the quality will be better.
Well, thank you so much, Shannon, for sharing that with us. I feel like we got a really insightful conversation here, drew from your expertise a bit, and we got to see a little glimpse of your personal growth with compassion fatigue, and I really appreciate that. I feel like you're speaking so much from the heart, and you're trying your best to share with us some of your own pieces from your mind and knowledge, words of wisdom that you have. But if our listeners want to find out more about you and what you do, where can they go?
Easiest way to get in touch and connect with my work is via my website. So burnoutspsychologysupport.com, and also social media, which is at Burnout Psychology Support as well. I'm on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn, which LinkedIn is my name, Shannon Swales. But that's the way you can, check me out and see my work. Yeah.
Amazing. We'll link those in the show notes. Thank you everyone for tuning in. Thank you once again, Shannon, for joining us today. We'll catch you in the next episode.
Thank you very much, Marie. It's been a pleasure.
You've been listening to the Self-Improvement Atlas, the Personal Science Insights podcast produced by LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. For more episodes like this from 10 different life management perspectives, search LMSL on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts, so you can get updated on everything we have to offer. We have a wide range of topics readily available for you to check out. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider rating our show, sharing it, and subscribing to our channel, as it helps us grow and bring you more quality resources. More of our work can be found on our website at pe.lmsl.net, where you can join our movement. I'm Marie Stella. Thanks for tuning in.